Hello, everyone. My name is Jeriko, professional game master, writer in my free time. I have recently started a project to write a campaign from scratch, and I wanted to create a video log, sort of, detailing my thought process as I talk really to myself primarily, so that if you want to write your own campaign or setting in the future, hopefully you can watch this and maybe get a little bit of inspiration from my process. As a general sort of concept, the campaign I'm writing, I'm not going to go too deep into it at the moment, but it is more of a sort of treasure hunt exploration focused campaign. It'll take place in Osirion, the continent at the northeastern corner of the continent of Garund, and is a desert themed sort of location. Really large desert that takes the majority of it, and a lot of ruins from the ancient past that sort of get found every now and then, and exploring some of those newer found ruins is going to be the jumping off point for this campaign. So, today we're actually going to work on designing our main city for the campaign. We are going with the city of Ito, right at the northeastern corner of Osirion's central desert. Population of roughly 9,500, just under 10,000. It's a small city, not large on its own, but one of the larger cities in Osirion, and the hub for the sort of trade of cultural relics and artifacts that get found within these explored ruins. So it's a great little starting point for our level one adventurers that are looking for a group to sort of sponsor them and get them into these large excavations and expeditions. Great place for them to start, return to between adventures, and eventually, hopefully, protect or save. So, looking at Ito, it is a city we don't have a lot of information on as is. Aside from the population, location, and a little bit about the structure and some buildings within it, we really don't have anything. We don't have a map to work off of. We're building this city pretty much from scratch. The little information we do have on the city's sort of geography, it is built on the inside of an oddly cylindrical crater, roughly a mile wide, 60 feet deep, and has a number of small springs that are found in the walls of this cliff. The water is then collected into cisterns, and a few more deep wells are dug into the bedrock to help supplement the city's water supply. So, how do we build a city in a crater? Uh, Originally, what we would go with is a more terraced design to the city, since a crater is sort of this sloping, uh, inverted dome shape on top of a water table, making it habitable. You would want it to be sort of stepped, terraced in a way that when the clay and stone is being excavated to reach that water table, material is being used to make the flat areas, the terraces, such that the city can be built atop of it. That was what I was originally going to work with, but since it is described as oddly cylindrical, that tells me there is a fully flat bottom in the city. And quite frankly, if it's fully flat, that makes it a little bit easier to design. And we're not going to go really into detail as to why it's oddly cylindrical. We can just leave that up to some past information that doesn't really need to be described here. So, cylindrical, crater about 60 feet deep, but that doesn't mean the city itself at ground level is 60 feet below the ground. The walls are natural protection from the sandstorms and any roaming bands of monsters or bandits in the desert, so the walls of this crater do need to go up a bit. I think for our purposes, we're going to say the city's roughly 20 feet below ground level, and the walls then rise about 40 feet above surface level. Makes it pretty average for being still a little bit sunken, but having a very strong natural wall that can be used. But that wall does need to be supplemented. You can't just have city walls and assume the city is going to be just fine because of that. You're going to still need people to keep a lookout, keep an eye out, and make sure that, there isn't a horde of monsters amassing on the sides of the wall where there isn't an entrance and no one can see if they're not paying attention. So we're going to set a few watchtowers around the edge of the city, and these watchtowers are going to serve twofold purpose. The first is a location for the city guard to actually keep watch on the surrounding region. This will, of course, be protected overhead from the sun. Since we are in the desert, you do need constant shade realistically for people. If you force people to walk around out in the sun, especially right in the middle of the day, they're going to struggle a lot. The second source or second purpose of these watchtowers is to protect those water sources, these springs that come out of the cliff face and the water being collected from them. The government and the guard is definitely going to want to be the ones in charge of the water supply in the city. If it's not protected, then realistically, any person could walk up, try and set a defensible position around one of these springs, and take a commodity hostage, essentially, that will, allow them to ask for power or wealth in return for freeing up the water source. So, definitely going to be the government that controls these water sources. So the watchtowers will serve this dual purpose. We could set up some sort of additional walls as well if we really wanted to, almost scaffolding on the interior of the wall between a couple watchtowers so people can sort of patrol. I don't know how necessary that is. Once we sort of get into the actual layout design, we'll take a closer look and see if we want that or not. Right now, I'm leaning towards no. While it could look neat, I don't think it's really necessary if there are enough watchtowers that realistically all directions could be watched. So, we've got our watchtowers, we've got our guard's main location around the city. What else do we have? Well, Ito is primarily a trade hub. It has a flourishing economy and lots of travelers. Uh, because of that, we're going to want a large section of the city to probably be this large open bazaar where people can get there, set up, and just sell and purchase a variety of different supplies. So I think the bazaar is going to take a vast majority of sort of the central region of the city up. We're not going to put it in the exact center because that would make it symmetrical, and symmetry is not a fan of. I'm not a fan of it when we're designing a city, at least. So we're probably going to put it slightly to the east of the center, not by a ton, just a tad bit, but enough that the two entrances of the city, one in the north, one in the south, the main road that sort of travels between them goes right through the center of the bazaar. So that way, anyone coming into the city following the main road winds up in the marketplace. So we've got this sort of large bazaar grounds that people can set up tents, stalls, and shops and sell any manner of supplies they want. Just for giggle's sake, we'll call it the dawn market and the dusk market that take place there, I think. Simply because being a location in the desert, most people are going to take that sort of midday time off, remain inside out of the sun, and use it more as a rest. So the market isn't going to be very, what's the term I'm looking for? Filled, I suppose, during those midday hours. So we'll break it down into essentially two market times that just is generally known by the public as the dawn market and the dusk market. And if we want, we can go a step further and sort of say things like the dawn market is mostly when people who live within the city are setting up their stalls and supplies. Since they're already there early in the morning, they're going to get ready to go. And then the dusk market is more for the people that have traveled into the city so they can sort of set up their stuff near the end of the day after they've arrived, before they go rest for the evening. They can hopefully sell some stuff, make some coin that can then definitely be spent at the various inns and other locations around the city. Not certain on that right now, just a thought. But we are going to have one more market, and we are actually going to have a midday market take place in the city, I think, mainly because the black market exists. Now, this gets a little bit into the lore of Osirion. Uh, The current pharaoh, Kemet III, the Ruby Prince, as he is called, I believe, for a while opened up the antiquities trade, allowed a lot of foreigners and Osirionologists to come in, begin exploring these ruins, and find and sell the artifacts and relics within to help bolster the sort of cultural identity of Osirion as well as its economy. From what I understand, following the events of the Mummy's Mask adventure path, this has been shut down. The law has been repealed. People are no longer allowed to go search ruins whenever they would like. That caused the black market to begin flourishing as those sort of relics have now become sought after, especially by foreign nobles. I wasn't a huge fan of this change. I understand it, but realistically, in my eyes at least, I think this campaign that I'm writing now taking place a chunk of time after Mummy's Mask, without anything else really happening, the Pharaoh and his advisors would be smart enough to recognize that this is still going to happen now since it created such a large boon in their economy. It would make more sense for them to officially allow excavation in controlled quantities in such a way that anyone could do it as long as they're sort of sponsored. And that's one of the themes I'm working with on the campaign is that there are specific groups in the city of Ito that are sanctioned. They sponsor slash hire adventurers and then create these large expedition caravans that go out to recently found locations, find what they have, and then the relics are traded and sold through these sponsoring groups. And it can be merchant families, maybe one of the temples in the city, the Adventurers Guild, and the Black Market is one of them. I imagine at this point, since it is becoming officially sanctioned, the black market is less illegal, but still tends to draw in the more criminal folk. But their trade is still officially sanctioned, and they're used as a way to sort of control that crowd of miscreants that would otherwise take up a chunk of the city guards' attention. So the midday market, getting back to that, in my eyes, is going to be the time when the black market primarily operates. And I think we're not going to call them the black market. They're just going to be called the midday market here in Ito. Uh, since that is a time when the reputable people are likely taking a break and resting, it becomes the perfect time for the miscreants to come out and apply their trade, sell, make deals without having to really worry about anyone getting on their case. What else needs to happen in the city now? We've got our locations for the guards, we've got our general bazaar. I think there's going to be a few permanent locations in it that are some of the major merchant groups, as well as things like a smithy, a glass blower, some tailors, your general sort of um, tradespeople that need to exist in a city for it to function. They will probably have permanent businesses in the bazaar or sort of right around the edges of it, probably within it. And then the rest of the open space is for temporary merchantry to occur. The one building that we need to make sure is going to be within the bazaar is sort of the trade office, I suppose we can call it. Um, there is definite control going on to make sure that any of the more important artifacts for Osirion's history are not sold outside of the borders and remain. And so there are a few government agents that exist in the city to make sure that they do that. And I've got, I believe their name is Field Director Safira Neda of the Ministry of Culture. They charge tax on any artifacts brought into the city in general and confiscates the ones that are seen as too great of a cultural value to be let out of the region. They're going to need their own office, and we're going to put that office right in the middle of the bazaar, I think. They're going to have agents at both entrances of the city, but they're going to work out of the actual marketplace itself, as opposed to the sort of government building where the governor and other important persons. We're going to put the government building, I think, outside of the bazaar itself, but the field director and the trade office will be in the bazaar. I kind of view it, I don't know, the sort of comparison that comes to my mind is if the leader of a foreign country visits the country you live in, you're going to treat that leader with a lot of respect since you are in similar positions, but you're not necessarily going to be deferential to them. It is a similar position. You're not one person isn't really above another, but you're going to show equal respect to each other. That's sort of how I view the field director versus the governor in the city. They're both important persons in sort of different positions of government, but neither of them is really above the other. And so they're probably going to be in different locations so they don't step on each other's toes too much. So we'll put the government, I think, at this point, sort of in the northeastern section of this city. And around it is probably where we're going to set the more affluent section of the city, where the larger merchant groups live, as well as some just general noble sorts and wealthy people. There will be mansions and a few villas, I think, in that area. Not necessarily a ton, but a few here and there, I think. And they'll have their own private security, of course, at most of those locations. That isn't the city guard. Um, I don't know. I never like thinking about nobles. We'll get to that later. That's no fun. Uh, Other locations, other important locations that we want in the city. We're definitely going to want mm, the library, the Grand Library, one of the other described buildings in Ito as one of the most preeminent libraries in the NRC region, comparable to the main library in Absalom and Opara. So that's going to take up a large section on its own, and I think there's going to be a few buildings around it, and I don't know, we'll call that district something like the Scrolls, I think. Something that is where the intellectuals tend to go in the city. There will be like a debate house, the library itself, with these cultural relics. I'd see like wizards going there, as well as a lot of Osirionologists and historians. People approaching and arriving in order to take a look and sort of collate notes and figure out the history. I can see them working with the trade office that when certain items are brought in, they get sent, or a few people from the scrolls get called to the office to actually take a look and evaluate what the item's significance actually is to Osirion's history. So we'll be working with that, and I think we'll put the Scrolls district probably in the north of the city, sort of up near the wall. I think I could see it being very fun if the library itself has kind of been built almost into the wall of Osirion's crater in an area almost between watchtowers, where it can be this really imposing edifice. Maybe this will be actually the one building that rises above the city walls and really becomes a point of interest, catching people's attention. If it's, we could actually put it due north if we want to almost act as a compass people in the region if we want. That could be fun. I like that idea. Sort of make its position almost a compass so anyone traveling can see the library, and if they can pinpoint the library with the wall, they can go, okay, that's due north if they're traveling in the day for whatever reason, not traveling by night. Um, what else do we have? There's not many more important locations that have been described. There are two uh, taverns, I think. The Bent Coin and the Night Oasis, and they've got a fun little bit of lore to them that the sort of wealthy people, the affluent, visit one of these locations while the more miscreants visit the other. And every now and then that'll switch as people start to figure out where the miscreants are meeting up. Then they'll start going to the other tavern, and thus the rich people will start going to the other tavern as well to avoid the miscreants. So it gets a fun little swap every few months or so. I think that'll just be fun to play up and describe in the story. And we have, I think, two more locations really described. One of them is Dancing Dunes, which is a establishment at the edge of the town's bazaar that apparently is a tea house converting into a cabaret, converting into a brothel, depending on time of day. So that's just a fun little building that's already set up. That's the sort of thing we're going to want to create a number of. These buildings that are described have their owner, have potentially a few people that can be met there, just to really help bring the city to life. And past that, the last real building is the House of the White Uraeus. I think that's how it's pronounced. I don't know though. It's Uraeus, but it is one of the more upscale inns in the city. Um, and also, we could. Mm, Nah, I was gonna say we could almost treat that as one of the temples in the city, but I think we won't. But that is a good point. We should figure out cities or temples in the city. I think we're gonna want close to four of them. I can imagine. We're gonna want one to Nethys, I think, simply because Nethys is one of the founding deities of Osirion, you could say. One to Abator, Abadar, whatever. I say Abator. I've been made fun of for that. The god of trade, essentially, since this is the largest trade hub, I can see a number of people being worshippers of him. I think we're also going to want a temple that more worships the old pantheon, the pantheon of ancient Osirian, Ra, Isis, Horus, etc., etc. Um, just sort of again with the focus on revitalizing Osirion's cultural history. That could be a really important temple, even if it's budding. Maybe they're one of the sort of sponsoring groups for the party that they could potentially choose instead of selling any relics. Anything that is brought back through this temple is more kept, and the party is given compensation for it. We'll get into that later. And I don't know. I feel like we should have one or two more temples to different deities. I'll have to think on what those deities are. Right now, I don't have any idea. I think those are the three most important temples we should have. Um, and of course, we're definitely going to want an adventurers guild in the city, a place that anyone traveling in and hoping to strike it rich, exploring and excavating the region can gather, sort of meet other like minded people, meet people who have already been here, and sort of get initial advice from them. We want to lean into that and make the Adventurers Guild a important location for the party to sort of network and meet people with. Um, I realize I didn't get necessarily a lot done with the idea. I've got a sketchbook going on that I'm writing down notes in and sketching out concepts in. So hopefully by the next time I record in a few more days, I will have an update, a few more buildings created and described, and a better general idea of the positioning. I heavily dislike making maps for cities. It's not fun for me realistically, but it is something that I definitely need to do since that does not exist for this city as well. And it really annoys me whenever I read through one of Paizo's adventure paths. They send the party to a city and they don't provide a map for it. It infuriates me, if I'm being honest. So I definitely want to have a map for the major city this campaign is going to take place in. But for now, I hope you got a little bit out of this, something you can work with, just generally as I talk through it. Hopefully, you will be gaining some ideas for your writing. and I will have some updates next time. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.